Jack says, so actually the deep dive in general, Chad, should we just approach the topic? And do you have something you want to say before we get into some questions that guide us down the rabbit hole of stretching here?
Well, actually I have a question for you, because the question that I moved around, I wasn't sure how this folded into the stretching question. So I feel like this is almost outside of the deep dive if we want to talk about this one first.
Let's cover him after. That'll be easier. Let's cover Jack's question after this. Then.
Okay. Okay.
But Zach's question, then let's get into that. Do you want me to read Zach's question and then go in, Chad? Is that how you want to go with this?
Yeah, because it sets it up nicely, and then we can just pluck off each of those individual. I think there's 9 of them. Yeah,
awesome.
9 individual questions that are related, some overlap as well.
Love it. Okay. Zach says, love the podcast, 5 stars. For those wondering, 5 stars, that means rating. You can now rate the podcast in Spotify. So everybody listening to this, if you have Spotify, please go over there, rate the podcast 5 stars. You can give us reviews as well on the App Store or on the podcast, whatever podcast app you use. Please do that. And let us know if we don't earn a 5-star review, just send us a message. Go to TrainerRoad.com/podcast and you can leave a message right there where you submit your questions and let us know what we can do to earn a 5-star review. So that, and then sharing this podcast on TrainerRoad is the best thing you can do to help us. It's fantastic. There we go. Nate just rated 5 stars.
Boom.
If you're joining on YouTube, then you could see that. But we got the audible version too.
It literally took 10 seconds.
There we go.
And it helps us. I mean, our marketing budget, I don't know if you've noticed, but like, this is kind of it. There's a little bit more in this, but it's not that big. So the way that we've always grown are from athletes telling other athletes about us. And part of that are reviews. You tell friends, you post in groups, all that stuff helps. So if you're loving AI FTP detection, post about that. That's very unique. The way that we do it too, we don't have to have all out efforts. And sharing it like this in reviews, amazing, amazing, amazing. That then we put back into the company, we grow more, we create more stuff, and it's a snowball of effect. So you do get something out of it.
Yes. Share with your friends. Thank you. Okay. Zach says, I'm an older rider. He mentions 50-ish years old. And I find keeping on top of my mobility is a constant struggle while training. Pre-exercise, post-exercise, dynamic, static, under load. What combination works best? I enjoyed the podcast with Kelly Starrett, which, by the way, you can go back. I believe that was 154. I could be wrong, though. Maxine, maybe you can check on that, or somebody in the live chat can check on it. But it was a fantastic podcast with Kelly Starrett, and he is from Mobility WOD, or actually the Ready State. Forgive me, it used to be Mobility WOD, but the Ready State, and he's just a fantastic resource on this. He says, but I would love Coach Chad to do a deep dive on mobility. And he says, I love those. Keep the deep dives coming, as well as recommend maybe some mobility exercises. Heck, even if Coach Chad could come up with some benchmarks for mobility, that would be awesome. Again, love the platform and love the podcast.
I have to say before we start, Amber, you grew up in the 80s. You were to school in the 80s. This was beaten into us. If you don't stretch, you're going to die before you work out, right? It was static stretching. And it's like, I even had it where some people, like at swim team, older people, they saw me get in without stretching. They would physically stop me. They're like, what are you doing? Like, you got to get out and stretch. Why are you getting, you're going to die. Like, you're going to drown. I don't know. So I'd love to hear.
Is that myth number 1 that we're going to bust right here, Chad?
Yeah. I mean, especially back then, there was, just no scientific evidence to support it. Just none. It was all conjecture. I mean, we didn't have blogs back then, but I don't know.
It's got to warm up.
Where it all came from.
Poor
I guess it was coaches, high school coaches.
Yes.
What'd you say, Amber? It's what?
My poor shoulder capsules. Like I stretched them, like just stretch the snot out of them. Like eventually had to get shoulder surgery on one of them because I stretched it so much that the capsule actually became unstable. So yeah, good times.
It is kind of crazy. Sorry, Chad. I'm running on a tangent before you even get into the deep dive. Cool.
We have all day.
I
don't. Because when you look at like pro swimmers, their shoulder mobility is weird. Like I'm sure y'all have seen like pro swimmers in the Olympics or anything else when they're warming up and they like swing their arms all over the place. They go in directions that normal arms do not go. It's pretty crazy. But that kind of makes sense though, right, Chad? Because those athletes need to explore pretty wide ranges of motion, particularly with their shoulders. Whereas, a cyclist, perhaps it's not quite as key to have that sort of level of mobility.
For swimmers, I think that's a pretty relevant range of motion. For most of us, it's not.
Yeah, that's probably a good point to get to start off on flexibility versus mobility and discuss that, right, Chad?
Yeah, let's just put that to bed because I'm pretty sure we butchered this many podcasts back when we just made it way too complex.
Yeah.
So let's just kick this off before we get to the individual questions with just two basic definitions: flexibility and mobility. So flexibility is the static maximum range of motion of a joint. So basically, this is what's limited by the joint structure itself. And really, that's as simple as bones and ligaments. So if you were to look at a skeletal system free of the muscles, the tendons, the fascia, everything else, you would just see, just looking at bones and ligaments that connect them, that gives you a sense of the joint's flexibility. It's unencumbered by anything. This is where mobility enters the picture, because this is now the ability to move freely and easily through that range of motion. So now we add the muscles and the tendons and the fascia back in, all the things that could potentially restrict that range of motion. And now we see how much of that range can be expressed. And this is super important: without pain, without restriction. Because if you have either, it's not really a true range of motion. It's forced, it's painful, it's not usable, and it is limiting, restricting, and it does not enhance performance. So we hear often people say, I just don't have the flexibility to whatever. Well, they probably do. I mean, there are some genetic limitations that do enter the picture, but by and large, it's their mobility that's lacking. So really simply, mobility is how much of the range of motion can you access, just how mobile is that joint.
So when you say access, you mean like actually functionally put to use?
Yep.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
Move through pain-free, comfortably, powerfully when necessary, if it's, again, a relevant range of motion to your discipline.
And which is for cycling in particular, when we're talking about you are going to explore a very specific range of motion, you will do so repeatedly, many times. So if you do have any sort of impingements or inability to be able to actually productively work within that range of motion, it's going to cause issues, right, Chad?
Yeah, and cycling is an interesting scenario in that some of our lower body has to be not hypermobile, but definitely mobile, although it's restricted to a particular plane of motion. And our upper bodies are really very fixed, depending on your discipline, even more fixed than others. I mean, if you think of a full distance triathlete, that position is so fixed. But if you think of a downhill mountain biker, that's a very mobile position. So it's hard to compare the two. And the mobility, even across riders, is drastically varied.
Remember that? Yeah. Remember when we were working with Lee McCormick from Lee Mike's Bikes, Nate? And like when we were starting to explore the range of motion that we needed to be able to descend, like our hips hurt. Remember that? It was crazy.
Yeah, it was my glute medius that actually got super tired because in that range of motion, I did not have the muscles to do it like 3 times, and I was like, oh, and that's because there's some stability side to side, which I never worked as a triathlete. I did, but even as a triathlete, I really didn't do it that much. But as a cyclist, we don't do much side to side work. So when I tried to go over to mountain biking and had to use that, definitely was a limiting factor in my descending.
Yeah, no doubt. By the way, the episode, thanks to Jesse, one of our awesome copywriters here at TrainerRoad, 222 is the episode with Kelly Starrett. That's the episode there. So if you're joining us in the live chat, you would have already seen that. If you're listening, hopefully that helps you. Maybe that's why, Chad, this is a generalization. I'm not even going to say it. Generalizations aren't needed here. Okay, moving on from there. So Chad, when it comes to stretching, Nate was talking about this static stretching thing that he had to do in grade school growing up. And there's a lot of different ways to stretch, static or dynamic. Are those kind of the two basic categories?
Yeah. So the question was posed as, should cyclists do dynamic or static stretching? And I took this as an opportunity to reframe the question and make it more general and ask, should cyclists stretch at all? Which is a fair question considering what we just described and a couple other reasons I'd like to mention. So really, this is what's the rationale for improving mobility or even adding mobility training to our regimen? We're already stretched. Why would we possibly pile more onto this? I see this coming down to 2 equally important reasons. And the first is that adequate mobility, I consider it vital to good health and general well-being. And I don't think many people would argue with me on that. When you have restricted movements, it simply leads to a less than satisfactory lifestyle. And I mean, in general, across the board. I've been dealing with the shoulder issue. That's my most recent issue. And I just resolved it maybe a week ago, and it's been liberating. It affected my life in so many ways. I mean, even sitting here on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, just lifting my cup of coffee, I had to do it with my elbow in a particular position. I had to kind of brace for the little twitch that would come with just lifting a cup of coffee. I mean, even an unweighted arm, it hurt me. And I can steer this at all of you because,
dude,
I mean, we know Jonathan. We know Jonathan in particular has already talked about, dealt with, addressed, seen, traveled great distances to see a physical therapist. You have, and I bet all of you have, experienced movement restrictions and pain that goes with it, that affects your day-to-day, that affects your mental state, that degrades your confidence, and it can downright butcher your motivation. I mean, everything I wanted to do out in the gym, and I have quite a fancy gym and I keep making it fancier, and I'm so restricted. When you have a shoulder that doesn't accommodate much movement, you can't do a heck of a lot. And when you were a cyclist and you're already bombing your lower body with all the stuff we do on the bike, you really can't do a lot. So it's, and let me ask you, I mean, Jonathan, we've talked about it, but Amber, Nate, does anything spring to mind?
Oh man, so many times. It's I feel like every time I have some kind of a restriction like this, it's this really powerful reminder that our bodies are extremely efficient. In biology, physiology, we talk about metabolic cost. Our bodies they do not waste energy, and they do not waste, they don't waste anything that's going to require metabolic cost. And so everything is very efficient. And then when you have some kind of a restriction, you realize, like, very concretely just how much it affects everything else, because we don't have a lot of buffer. It's just not built in that way.
Yeah, and that's a super good segue into what I consider to be the second most important point for rationalizing or incorporating mobility training into what all the things we already have to accommodate. And that's excellent mobility is absolutely necessary when the goal is to optimize movement. So if we're looking for optimization, then nothing short of excellent is going to suffice. It's hard to do anything really well if you're fighting your own body. It's pretty simple. And what we do isn't hyper technical in nature. The movements we do, I mean, especially if you're clipped in, seated on your bike, you can ride very sloppily and still turn those pedals over. So it's not highly technical, like say throwing a javelin, where every little nuance change in what you do carries big outcomes, but it is hyper repetitious. So if we have a single small movement fault and we multiply that times hundreds, thousands, even millions of times, and that's literal, millions of times, we'll repeat this. This is the very nature of overuse injuries. And it's not that we use it too much, it's that we use it improperly. Our bodies are capable of being utilized again and again and again for the same joint action, the same muscle action. But if we do it improperly, down the line, it's going to lead to issues. And it's because of this that I believe that mobility is one foundation among a small handful of them for becoming as fast as you can be. If it's not there, don't plan on ever achieving that.
Another way of looking at this is your body is always trying to help, right? So your body is going to try to optimize based on the training, your fueling, everything else that you're doing. And the fewer constraints that your body has, the better it can optimize. And so when you have less mobility, you have more constraints. When you have better mobility, you have fewer constraints, and you give your body the freedom to explore that useful, accessible range of motion and determine what the best movement pattern, most optimal movement pattern is going to be. You can't do that when you have too many constraints. Completely.
And this kind of brings me to a side point that I do want to bring up. It's not an equally important reason. I feel like it's a combination of a result of these two reasons or an offshoot of it. But mobility training is something that offers us the opportunity to suss out what I'll refer to as referred limitations. So we've talked about referred pain, or what referred pain is. It's something in one part of the body is actually causing pain in another part of the body. And the same thing happens with our musculoskeletal system and our flexibility and mobility limitations. And there's just too many examples to mention, but let me do some pertinent ones. First, tight quads can cause knee problems. And I linked to a study on patellar tendon issues because I know a lot of us deal with those, if not all of us at some point in time. I mean, just tight quads can actually lead to knee pain, and it's so simple to address. Static stretching and dynamic stretching actually improved function in the linked study, reduced pain in people with inflexible quads. It was as simple as that. All they had to do was just lengthen that muscle a little bit, give it a little bit of weekly love, daily love, whatever it may be. Issue resolved. Tight hip flexors, even tight glutes, can lead to low back problems. Tight glute, especially your glute max, can manifest as sciatic issues. And I bring this one up because it's especially on my mind recently, because I'm seeing a sports therapist I went in and, she asked me the laundry list of issues with my body, previous issues, current, what I do. And I said, I'm having sciatic issues and I don't know if there's much to do about that. And she says, oh, I don't know that it's sciatic issues. Let's take a look at your glutes. Sure enough, I'm seeing relief from adjusting my glutes.
Wow.
Tight hamstrings, no, not news to anybody, can lead to low back pain, knee pain, interestingly, even foot pain. And then move on to the upper body. If you have tight lats, and this is what explained my shoulder restriction, tight lats of all things, a big muscle on your back was causing my shoulder, I couldn't bring my arm above my body, out in front of my body because of something that was going on behind my body. Tight upper back, obviously, can lead to neck issue. And then tight scapulae. So your shoulder blades. This can actually lead to shoulder issues galore. And what's interesting is that I found out that all this is about me right now, that my scapulae, my shoulder blades were tacked down. I mean, this is the opposite of mobile, right? What had happened, I basically cultivated my own muscle imbalance by not recognizing the benefit of a fuller scapular range of motion. Back and down, back and down. That's all you hear. That's all I told as a personal trainer, never recognizing that pretty much every exercise can be changed in such a way that you actually protract your scapulae also. Let those shoulder blades move their full range of motion so that you don't over time restrict that motion. And as cyclists and as people sitting in cars, I mean, that position, we sit in a protracted position. So my consciousness was always on keeping it retracted so that I don't develop those other compensations when I was just reinforcing the opposite compensation.
Motion is lotion. But yeah, the scapulae are really important. And those and having less mobility in your scapulae can affect rib mobility, which can affect breathing mobility as well. So all of these things are connected and pretty vital.
One thing, if I could add another reason that cyclists should, this whole question, should cyclists stretch at all? There's an inherent risk that we should all choose to own if we are going to continue cycling in crashing. And typically in crashing or something like that, what happens is that we are forced to explore ranges of motion that we don't typically explore. And that's when a lot of injuries happen, right? So that either looks like when you pull a groin or even a lot of collarbone breaks. It could very well be exacerbated by a lack of mobility that a person has. This is really common. Shoulder injuries, it's like galore. Knee issues, same thing. If you are not to the point where, like Chad's talking about, this range of motion where within we pedal, and that's what we explore, and we do that repeatedly, and we have to be able to be good at that. But then if you are a cyclist, particularly one, if you're cyclocross, mountain biking, anything off-road, or crit racing, because you crash just as much as an off-roader, anything with that, you have to know that occasionally you're going to be pushed out of that range, and you have to be able to take that. We've talked about before how it's such a shame when you see Grand Tour cyclists Pro Tour cyclists, and when they fall over, they're out for weeks, right? For one reason or another. And this is the sort of thing that you just have to account for as well. Not only will it make you a more durable cyclist, but it just makes you a more healthy human. And that's really an important thing. If you are not a healthy human, it's tough to get faster. We can't just become such a narrowly focused tool. So yes, you should stretch and do all that to be able to be effective at riding your bike, but you should also be prepared for the rainy days, so to speak. And mobility is a great way to be able to do that. Chad, do you have anything else to add on that before we talk about like how flexible do I need to be? Because that's the tricky part is if we talk to somebody in a different sport, or if we look to something, like Instagram or something else or TikTok, we see people that are insanely flexible. And suddenly the definition of flexible is redefined when we see that. And we wonder if we're flexible enough.
So our flexibility needs of cyclists is super narrow. So rather, I'd like to look at the benefits of stretching, just be a bit more broad about this.
Yeah, please.
And I guess we could really phrase it as, or ask ourselves, why do athletes stretch? Why do we floss? Why do we roll? And I want to just focus on the big three. I have others, and I'll get to them relative to another question. But let's look at the top three that are most often cited. The first of which is injury prevention. And I'm here to tell you that no research reliably links stretching with injury reductions. And there's a lot of reasons behind it. Maybe the studies weren't formulated well. Maybe it didn't have a big enough subset of folks, whatever.
Imagine being in that study. Like, we're going to injure you.
Okay. So that's one limitation, or that's one issue they're going to face. But there's also just the idea that it's too hard to control. I mean, you can have athletes do a particular thing for a particular length of time, and if they get injured, did it come down to the fact that they didn't stretch, or the myriad other things that might have caused the injury? So it's just too tough a thing to measure.
Big enough population over time. I mean, if there was a strong signal, you would see it. This
Over
is
time,
like,
it would have to be a really
Yeah.
elaborate observational. I mean, you'd have to go back so far, and
I think
it could be
I don't
done.
know. This
I
is
suppose it could be done.
this is I talk about. I don't even talk about this. My sister is like a PhD, Johns Hopkins public health one of the top researchers in the world for tobacco. But that's an example of, they take people who smoke and people who don't. People who smoke get cancer, people who don't, right? And if it was impactful, like as much as that, people who stretch, people who don't, you would see it all the time. People who don't stretch get injured, and at like a much higher rate. So if it's really small like that, and you can't do what John says, design a study where you're going to get some kind of injury inside of it. You got to look at populations over time. And because there's such variability in the reason why someone gets injured, I'm guessing the reason is there's not enough like oomph to that factor to get it out of there. That's what I think, or it could be designed. I'm not really into the research, but that's what I'm thinking is the reason why it is. And that doesn't mean though that there's not impact, which just means it's not detectable at that level.
That's the tricky part about studies.
Solid observation.
Yeah, it's hard to observe those sort of impacts that could be absolutely real and beneficial for an athlete, but it can be hard to observe those when you're looking at various different people or even large scales like that. And it's it's like, imagine putting together some sort of study or review where you have enough size to be able to pick up on that too. It's all just really complicated. It's not as simple as we think of like, oh, I stretch, now I'm not injured, and mark that down. So anecdote doesn't equal it. Sorry, Chad.
But that's okay. Well, still on the topic of injury prevention as being, one of the reasons why we should stretch. My favorite blog phrase, and I'm sorry, but blogs these days, period, they're just rife with
except for trainerroad.com/blog.
Oh no,
that one's 100%.
Certain blogs are solid, certain blogs are research, and certain blogs don't do what I'm just about to describe. Basically, my phrase of the day is research shows. That's been my phrase of the last several years. Research shows. And then it just gives you something and you're just supposed to buy it, swallow it, hook, line, and sinker. Scroll down, there's no links, there's no citations. And often enough, there's products or services to be purchased at the end of all of this. So, and it doesn't mean the stuff isn't true. It just means, if you're going to tout this, can you at least cite it? Can you give us some evidence of the fact that this is true, that there's some evidence that supports it? But based on everything I've read, injury prevention is simply a boat that won't float. Okay, that's not the best reason for us to get behind adding stretching to our regimen. Then, amongst the big three, let's get to the second one: improve performance. I looked at a systematic review, looked at 28 studies, and they looked at improving muscle performance. And they did jumping, sprinting, different types of contractions. What they find: chronic stretching doesn't affect muscle performance in half the studies. Chronic stretching increases muscle performance in the other half of the studies. Chronic stretching decreases muscle performance in none of the studies. Okay. So it may help, it may not, but it doesn't hurt. So in terms of improved performance, you at least know that you're not going to damage your performance by adding mobility to it. So there's nothing really to lose by trying it except for the time commitment and perhaps opportunity costs, which we'll discuss in a bit. And then also another study looked at dynamic stretching, the benefits of which actually counteracted its own concurrent effects. So the muscle tendon stretching that we look for when we stretch was countered by the muscle, or it countered the muscle warm-up effects. So on the positive, we got a warm-up. On the negative, the muscle stretching had a negative impact. So even within dynamic stretching, there's no way, you can't just close book, say dynamic stretching works, let's get after it. And this line of research actually led me to a really interesting article where the authors suggested that we retire flexibility as a major component of physical fitness. This was just done a couple of years ago, and I thought, oh, this ought to be good. But I read it, and there's a lot of solid support, because he recognized that there was little predictive utility with the big flexibility in general. And it's not a stretching contest, right? I mean, we're not looking for who has the most flexibility. We're looking for who's the best athlete. Does flexibility predict that? Yeah, show me evidence. His point was that time is better spent on other things like managing your body composition, cardiovascular fitness, muscle strength and endurance, and all things that are related to better health and performance benefits. He also pointed out the flexibility and mobility can be achieved indirectly through, and he noted strength training. And I had already come across a linked study that strength training versus stretching for improving range of motion. This was another review just last year. looked at 11 randomized controlled trials. They had 452 participants. And what did they note? But improved range of motion was similar between strength training and flexibility training. So,
Cool.
and there is a caveat that most of these studies did look at the hamstrings, but still it's a muscle, and strength training brought about the same level of flexibility, mobility as did dedicated mobility, flexibility training. And then when it comes to specifically strength performance, we don't even need to get into that. I linked to a single study that is representative of many studies that provide much support for the negative outcomes that are associated with stretching just prior to strength training. And yes, this is just prior. We'll elaborate on different timing later. With endurance training, there's nothing in direct support for improved performance, but indirectly, I mean, anything that facilitates our return to training is going to increase our training consistency and our adherence, and eventually could, in fact, manifest in improved performance. So while it doesn't directly happen, it could indirectly over time happen. So I don't want to say it can affect endurance performance, but I couldn't find any science to directly say stretch and your endurance performance will improve.
Should we stretch or nah?
Yeah, because there are other reasons. And the first of which is the third reason in the oft-cited reasons for stretching is increased range of motion. Okay, that's typically what we're after when we stretch, right? So if we know that improved performance, probably not likely. Injury prevention, well, it's just nothing that really supports it. Increased range of motion, tons of support for this. So the results of acute stretching or rolling are transient and short-lived, right? So anything you do on the roller or on the ground or however you go about it, you're probably going to see effects that last on the high end about 30 minutes. So the takeaway is that there has to be some level of consistency if you want to sustain these changes. You can't just do it, call it good, and expect to be flexible forever. So in line with this, my recommendations are to roll this into a warm-up or a cool down, or set aside a usual time such that you do it with a high level of consistency. And there's benefits to be had with just about timing at just about any time. Immediately post-workout does carry with it the benefit of elevated tissue temperature and greater blood flow, because you're just coming off of a workout, your muscles are charged, so to speak. Post-workout, I mean, you can do it right after the workout. I linked to a paper that showed benefits of doing it 24 hours all the way up to 96 hours post-workout. So it doesn't, you don't have to stretch immediately post. You don't have to even do it the next day, as long as you're getting it in there somewhere. Well, benefits have demonstrated themselves. Foam rolling might actually be the best solution when it comes to quad and hamstring flexibility, which is obviously relevant to us as endurance athletes, cyclists especially. And I linked to a study that looked at 15 male, 15 female college kids. They did dynamic stretching, static stretching, foam rolling. They did all of them in random order on 3 separate days, separated by 42 to 72 hours. So no carryover effects. And what do they find is that there was greater flexibility was achieved in the foam rolling intervention. So takeaway here is that range of motion increases, or could be that range of motion increases are probably the number one reason to engage in mobility training. Sorry.
Possibly flexibility. Yeah. So this resonates with me after coming back from my injury. I had and actually it's on the forum. Go to trainerroad.com/forum. And if you look up knee injuries, we'll post the link into the chat right now on YouTube as well. If you look up knee injuries, you'll see it. And I had a whole routine that I would go through. It's a mix of mobility work and then also just some basic, like simple strength exercises. But when doing those regularly, those are like a great fix, Chad, or a great systems check for me to be able to know how I was doing and if I was ready to actually train. Because I was dealing with a severe knee injury. It was keeping me off the bike, excruciating pain. Sure. And this was years, and it was really difficult. So if I went out to go do a training ride, which once again, such a huge fan of the trainer in particular for many reasons, but this is a great reason. If you go and do a ride and you get halfway out on a loop, but you're experiencing pain, you have to ride back and then possibly push through pain even more. Whereas when I was on the trainer, I could just stop as soon as if I felt pain while I was rehabbing this injury and coming through. Once again, totally different goal than getting faster necessarily, even though that was the way to get faster. I was just trying to get my body to work well. And when I was able to do this normal routine with consistency, I was able to see hey, I'm not where I need to be in terms of hip internal rotation or whatever the main thing that I was working on. I'm not where I need to be on that right now. So I'm not going to do a big, long workout. I'm going to do something small. I might not do anything at all. So it's like part of this too. And you have this routine, like you're talking about, Chad, it's a really good way for you to keep tabs on how your body is doing. And whether it comes from injury or whether it comes from lack of maintenance, do something consistently so you don't have to worry about the lack of maintenance. And then you can find out whether it's, you're ready to go or not. So coming back from injury, once again, this is an edge case. We're not just talking about average cyclists, but coming back from injury, that really resonates with me. And it's a very valuable thing, or was for me. Chad, you mentioned foam rolling. Do foam rolling and stretching, you've mentioned the fact that range of motion was better in that study of athletes when they were foam rolling versus I think it was dynamic versus static. But do they accomplish the same thing? Should you be doing both of those things, or can you do either or? Because once again, it's like a time thing. Like if I'm going to be doing mobility work, flexibility work, foam rolling work, and all the other many different things that I could do, I could spend hours doing that. And I might be better suited just spending hours training and getting faster.
Right.
So,
and see, that was a comparison between all the different types, or a few different types of stretching. And they're looking at the hams and the quad strings in youngsters. I don't think they were athletes. They might have been untrained, but it does further the point that I'd like to make. And in order to do that, let's just do a quick 10,000 foot view of what stretching is. I don't intend to make this a kinesiology lesson. I don't think that information is going to really make anybody faster. So I'm going to keep this super simple and just say that muscles contain basically a receptor called the muscle spindle, and that conveys the appropriate muscle length to the brain. Okay. So if you stretch, if the muscle becomes too long, if it becomes long too quickly, if it becomes too long too quickly, there's a involuntary contraction termed the stretch reflex. Okay. And stretching can affect this reflex both positively and negatively. So stretching directly targets the muscle tendon unit. So when we talk about stretching, static stretching, passive stretching, dynamic stretching, that's what we're targeting, right? So this in turn can increase the range of motion. And again, it's transient, 30 minutes at the high end, but other methods, especially if you perform them with regularity, can carry lasting effects, even if they're achieved via different effects, different responses. So the point is that stretching the muscle tendon unit isn't the only way to improve your mobility. Stretching comes in many forms, and these many forms, however you do it, can positively affect our mobility. It can help us access each joint's range of motion. And it doesn't matter if it's done via stretching, whether it's static or dynamic or passive, whether it's done via tissue manipulation, which is the rolling and also the flossing that we'll touch on. So my point here is simply don't get hung up on the stretching modality. Just do something. Find one of them that works for you. Find whatever combination of them works for you. Find the things that address your specific limitations.
So rolling, I guess one way to think of it, stretching just pulls on the muscle, whereas rolling actually could work on the muscle all along every inch of it, right, Chad? And being a pretty big differentiation between the two.
Yeah. So this, I just saw as kind of an opportunity to talk about the various forms of stretching. We kind of already talked on them, or I did, but let's just define them in case anyone isn't clear. And I don't expect everyone's up on all these terms. So I'll quickly lay them out. Static stretching is basically the bane of everyone's existence who doesn't understand the actual benefits of stretching, right? This is the one that'll negatively impact performance, so we shouldn't do it. This, and we'll talk about that, but this is holding the position at the end of your range of motion. So you go as far as you can stretch and you sit there. So good examples of this would be the couch stretch that we've promoted in the past, the pigeon stretch, which is where you get those deep hip muscles by putting your foot up in front of you on like a plyo box, knee out to the side and leaning into it. And then there's dynamic stretching, and this is moving in and out of your ends of range of motion. So you don't hold it at any point. You simply move to one end of it and come back to the other end of it. And examples of this would be leg swings, especially good for cyclists, whether you recognize it or not. And then really simply jumping jacks. Jumping jacks are a good demonstration of dynamic stretching. And while we're on the topic of dynamic stretching, I did come across a study that looked at the speed of the dynamic stretching. And they compared 50 reps per minute versus 100 reps per minute. So just, the pace of it. It's not that they did it 50 or 100 times, but that speed. And they looked at strength, range of motion, muscle and tendon length, again, stretching's intended outcome. And what they noted was that slower worked better in all measures. So my takeaway here is simply that there's no need to get overly aggressive with your dynamic stretching. And I feel it necessary to bring this up because when you talk about leg swings and dynamic stretching, man, I've seen people do some outright dangerous stuff. So slow it down. Doesn't need to be explosive or out of control.
Yeah.
And there's also PNF, and it's proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, which is an assisted form of stretching, and that falls in line with all the passive stretching where you'll use like a towel or a band, gravity, another person. It will cover that another time if we cover it at all. And then foam rolling, and foam rolling is exactly what it sounds like. You're rolling your muscles over foam. Okay, so it's a foam roller. You roll
Hard foam.
Yeah,
well,
sometimes rubber.
It can be. And if all of the foam's hard to you, well, that's an indication that you should probably do a bit more rolling, because some of that foam is downright soft once your muscles are compliant and can actually handle it.
Mhm.
So the aim here is the release of fascial tissue, which is, we've talked about before. It's the connective tissue that surrounds and separates our muscles. And foam rolling addresses the condition of the tissue. So it's no longer the muscle tendon unit. Now it's the condition of the tissue itself. And think along the lines of adhesions, tissue stiffness, a term, thixotropic responses. This is basically the viscosity of the muscle itself, which sounds weird, but I saw it described as like squeezing a gel packet. At first, it's kind of solid. The more you squeeze it back and forth, it becomes less viscous. Same idea. Instead of a gel packet, we're talking about the fascia of the muscle, right? And then finally, tissue flossing. Only going to touch on this a little bit because frankly, I ran out of time, but it's kind of along those lines. You use compression via a floss band and movement of the joint to, and this is a quote from one of the papers I came across, to alter the relationship of the fascia with the neuromusculoskeletal system. So think about that. It's the fascia and how it relates to both your neural system, your muscle system, and your skeletal system. So we're just trying to change that relationship favorably a bit. And
Chad, can I visually explain what that looks like?
Sure.
It looks like wrapping a really tight band around a portion of your muscles, and then you move through the range of motion. And it's not very comfortable.
It can be really painful.
Yep. And basically what it does is, if you think of your muscles with the lining, it pinches that. So then it allows them to operate and to slide independently from each other. It forces that myofascial release in a different way. Instead of just mashing with a foam roller, it's squeezing it so much, but then still requiring the muscle to move, that it tears those binds and those adhesions that exist right there. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And then the single study that I linked to on tissue flossing did point out that it may trump dynamic stretching in some measures. So I think, and I'm not saying this is better than dynamic stretching. It's again, back to that same take home, pick one, pick all of them, vary them, do a little bit of whatever. All of them demonstrate efficacy, at least in some ways, if not a lot of the ways we're seeking.
So the answer, instead of doing all of them, the answer is to do what works best for you. Would that be a fair assumption when we going back to that question of, should I stretch as a cyclist, or should I foam roll, or should I do any of these things? You have to do what works. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, that's actually a good segue into to my next question, the next question, which is, what areas of flexibility should I focus on most? Which I kind of reframed as to what areas of flexibility actually limit your performance. What of them actually limit your day-to-day, just normal things outside of the performance realm. And I think the big question becomes, is mobility training necessary for athletes? And in my view, that's a hard yes. I think from the perspective of young athletes, you can maintain your existing mobility by establishing and then supporting, super important, proper movement patterns. Okay. So you don't allow the limitations to creep into your scenario and eventually become compensations, and then have those compensations down the road translate into greater issues. So to put it another way, it's prehabilitation, and that's a kind of a buzzy term. So let's just call it what it is. It's preemptive self-care. And recently, when I was with my sports therapist, she asked me, "What do you do in terms of self-care?" And I was stuck. I was like, I don't know what that means. I mean, it's
I can only imagine.
It's kind of in the term, right? Self-care. What do you do to care for yourself? And obviously she's talking in the context of body work. And I didn't have any good answers for her, except that I did a lot of things, but I didn't do any of them consistently.
You're like, I lift heavy, I pedal hard.
Yeah.
Hard.
And I sometimes lay on a roller and writhe and cry and try to pretend I'm watching TV, even though I'm in so much pain, I can't process anything I'm seeing. But this is my point here, is that this is your opportunity as a youngster to establish the consistency that's going to serve you for a lifetime. Set those habits up now, because they will benefit you. Take it from an aging athlete, which brings us to aging athletes. This is an opportunity to fix issues rather than avoid them or accommodate them or tolerate them. it is surprisingly easy to work around movement limitations, to learn to live with them, and you can do it for long periods of time. What am I describing there but chronic pain? I mean, something that 1 out of 3 Americans and Brits, I think those were the statistics we looked at last time. Point is, a lot of people suffer from this. So it's my view that mobility training is a way for us to take ownership and affect control over these things. It's our opportunity to decide how we move, quite literally, through life, through training, through competition, through playtime with your friends and your family. And then we'll address this a little bit later, but it doesn't have to add significant time to your training. I do recognize that we're already busy with training. We're already busy with our life schedules. And I also acknowledge that there's a payoff versus opportunity cost scenario here. You know, the cost of something else, it's either going to come at the expense of something else if your time is super limited, or you're going to have to figure out how to economize, trim down those other things such that you can force this in here. But my belief is that young or old, some is always better than none. How much is needed, how much is actually beneficial is always contextual. So, you know, a young rider with no real limitations versus a battered veteran like me, I'm probably going to dedicate more time to this, and I need to, even if it comes at the expense of a little bit of time on the bike.
Yeah. And I want to, oh, go ahead, Nate.
Aging or young? I don't.
Sorry, say that again, Nate.
Am I an aging athlete or a young athlete? Like,
You're on the cusp, buddy.
Welcome to the club. I think is what Chad's saying.
I'm not going to be able to lift my coffee mug soon on my way to 140.
It was temporary.
Look, Chad,
I'm super good now.
I'm still young.
Check out that shoulder mobility. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I haven't even rolled my last today.
The point about chronic pain is really important. And I want to also emphasize that could also be just chronic discomfort. I think a lot of athletes get really good at pushing through and tolerating pain and discomfort to a point where, for those of us who are experienced in training, we kind of have this default mode of just push through and override those sensations. And so we're at a higher risk of putting up with and tolerating a lot of discomfort that you don't necessarily need to. So just because you're not experiencing what you might define as chronic pain, you might be just, experiencing some chronic discomfort that frankly is just a huge energy drain. I mean, if you think about doing a time trial, for example, the minor discomfort, or maybe not so minor discomfort, that you feel from the saddle is such a massive distraction and such a huge energy drain, as like a very simple, straightforward analogy that a lot of people can identify with. But you just
don't tell me that's minor, Amber. That discomfort is real and major.
The discomfort, right? It's such a drain, and it drains everything. And Chad mentioned this earlier in this conversation, but I mean, what that does to your motivation and your ability just to engage with life in general, let alone your training. I mean, it's huge. So I would challenge everybody who's listening to this. You might think, chronic pain, whatever, I'm not there yet, but you might have some minor discomforts that become white noise to you over time that might be affecting you more than you think.
It's a really good point. You can suss that out via a single massage. I mean, think of you go in, you see a massage therapist, and maybe it's a rarity or it's your first time even, and you come away thinking, oh my God, I feel so much better. And you do small things where you realize, oh, I don't have that pain or that restriction, or, oh, it used to be hard or painful to do that, and it isn't now. So, and it's kind of a wake up call to how much pain you've actually just kind of stuffed and you move past, don't acknowledge.
I can't tell you how many times I've said to my massage therapist, I didn't realize how much tension I was carrying until it was gone. And then when it's gone, you're like, whoa, wow. That was just building up over time. And I was just tolerating, accommodating. Yeah. And that brings up another point. This is just anecdote, but I was working with a bodywork professional, and I not jokingly said something like, oh, I had this pain. It came out of nowhere. It was all of a sudden. And he just laughed, and he's like, that's what everybody says. This came out of nowhere. It was all of a sudden. And he said, but really what's been happening is your body has been accommodating and compensating for a really long time. But because you were able to compensate and just push through or tolerate, you didn't notice until the whole system broke down. So it's very rare that these things come out of nowhere. And to your point, being aware of the discomfort earlier on in that kind of accommodation pathway, right, might be very beneficial.
It's kind of like your body's codependent, and it's like compensating. And it's like, I'm tired of this. The resentment goes up, and then they just blows up. And you're like, well, I didn't even know. Like, you should have told me. This came out of nowhere. It's been years. They've been putting up.
Your body's like, I've been telling you.
Yeah. No, they haven't been telling you. They've been thinking it. They're just, that's the codependent part. It's in their head. They're like, why didn't you know this? And they all gave up at once.
Chad, the question needs to be asked. Is being too flexible bad for me as a cyclist? There's a whole lot of non-scientific narrative around this, where it's like, I've heard this before, where whether it's you stretch too much and you become less powerful, or you become less fit for one reason or another. I've heard this narrative. I don't know if there's any science behind that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this probably stems from static stretching's bad rap. So I kind of want to look at it from that perspective first. And then I have a couple other little points to make. So I think the question then becomes, does static stretching's bad rap apply to endurance athletes? I mean, we know clearly affects strength athletes. Does it affect us? And what is that bad rap? Is that acutely? So when we're talking this severe sudden response, the stuff that happens immediately, static stretching can reduce force capabilities, and this reduces that elastic response, that stretch reflex I talked about earlier. And this is especially relevant in strength sports, in sprinting, etc. My question is, how important is this downside, this so-called downside to most of us? I mean, I do recognize that someone, a track sprinter in particular, this is probably pretty relevant, right? The last thing they want to do is hold a long static stretch and then hop on the bike and try to do a standing start and bury themselves for a lap. But them aside, ours is a sport of largely concentric only contractions, right? So we only have the muscle. Amber, do you want to take this? I know you're going to cover the concentric eccentric topic. Oh, so really, it's quite simple.
Yeah, concentric is where you're contracting the muscle and the muscle is shortening. And then there's also another form of muscle contraction where you can be contracting the muscle as it's lengthening. So one way of thinking about this is, as you're walking downstairs, your quadriceps muscle is actually lengthening, even though you're contracting it. Whereas if you're trying to do a leg extension on a leg extension machine, for example, you're contracting that quad at the same time as it's shortening. So it's a very different sensation and a very different effect on the muscle itself.
Right. And as you vacillate between that lengthening and shortening, that's where the elastic component comes into all of this. And so my question is, with us only really exhibiting or performing concentric only contractions, does that elastic component play any part of that next contraction? I mean, we shut off for long enough that it's hard for me to imagine, and there probably is research on this, sorry I didn't find it, that says, it's turned off long enough that the elastic response is dead in the water and we don't really benefit from it. And that wouldn't surprise me at all. So where would the decreases in muscle elasticity actually harm our performance as endurance athletes?
Interesting perspective. I hadn't thought of it that way.
And we do know with running, I mean, as far back as 2009 and probably farther back than that, and I linked one study that where static stretching does raise energy costs, and in this case of the endurance running itself, but running relies on a stretch reflex. It has an eccentric component. Muscle stiffness is a big concern with runners, not so much with riders.
And if I could pitch kind of like the other side of the coin here, if you get injured, then you can't train at all. And who cares about the minimal energy cost that you had, right? Like we're kind of talking about this, like, sorry, what, say that again, Nate?
But it doesn't prevent injury.
Well, but it very well,
not enough to.
It very well could. If you are very not mobile and then you are exploring ranges of motion that you are not familiar with and you're doing so repeatedly, that's likely going to cause some sort of injury, right? So, because there's this temptation to do extremes, right? It's either look at the evidence and say, well, a study hasn't proven that there's no injury, so I am going to completely ignore any personal signs and signals that I have, and I'm going to not stretch because it could harm and it could make it more energy or costly from an energy perspective to move. Or you can look at it like, well, it's probably good to do some maintenance and to make sure that my body can just perform well within this range of motion. And if that's the case, once again, I'm just looking at it in a vacuum here. If you're worried about losing a small amount of efficiency when you're operating and then compound that over a month of training, or just missing that month of training because you're injured, you can't just completely lose focus here and pick one side or the other. That's why.
Yeah. Specific, I know I hear your point generalized, like if you don't do this, you could lose out way more on
Yeah.
the other side. So many things in life like that. Generally in running, how this is more, I have a study to back this up, but I think it's more like the mix of it though. It's technique, like for list of injury, technique first, then it's usually like some type of muscle imbalance, like weak glute medius or something inside of that. And actually maybe even before that is volume and intensity and like how you space your running. And then probably mobility is probably pretty far down. And a lot of times with technique, especially for new runners, it's going to be actually less mobility. It's like shorter steps because you're doing these huge bound strides and you're bam, bam, bam every time. So although that is in the list of things for running and your point totally stands, if I was a runner again, I would probably put more effort into other preventative things just for your point first, and then work down the pyramid to that to see if there's really an issue with that. And there are definitely people who do have that issue, and there's something that is tight and they fix that and they don't have the IT band issue. Like their IT band being tight being one of them. Mine would get really angry when I would do too much volume, and I would physically like release it with my fingers and it relax and I could run again. It was crazy.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to avoid is a person listening to this and being like, stretching will make me slower. I'm never going to stretch. And if anything forces me into any sort of a stretch, I'm going to avoid it because it will make me slower. Don't do that. Like, don't just go from one side to the other like that.
Wearing a helmet might slow you down on a climb.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
Not much, but it might. And so I'm not going to wear a helmet, but then
what really makes you slow is when you crash and you don't have a helmet. That makes you real slow. So
real slow forever. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's all about priorities. Like we can't lose perspective on what really matters here. But Chad, really interesting point on the eccentric and concentric contractions and how static stretching actually affects that. That was a very measured approach of looking at that. That
is, specific to static stretching, but there's even, if we're going to poke holes, let's look at dynamic stretching too, because, this is an argument that I could see cited, and this is a study and there is support for this, that this one in particular looked at knee flexion, peak torque, and how it decreases with the dynamic stretching warm-up. Okay. So now people are going to think, oh, I can't do dynamic either because that actually decreases my peak torque, but we're endurance athletes. I mean, how often does peak torque actually limit us as an endurance athlete? Again, maybe if you're a track sprinter and you have to take off and you need that peak torque for the initial boom, 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 getting the wheel up to speed, maybe that's a concern. For most of us, I don't think it is. And then even for those track sprinters, and the science supports that if you static stretch, as long as you keep those stretches short, and short in this case was under 20 seconds, which I still consider a reasonably long stretch, low in intensity.
Long enough when you're in holding that stretch, that's for sure.
For sure. But low in intensity. So not so much, because the idea here is to keep it, and they use very commonly the Likert scale, the 1 to 10 scale. So 5 on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being intense pain, 1 being zero pain. And then you can follow it and basically ameliorate all the harmful effects of static stretching as long as you do a little bit of dynamic stretching, a little bit of movement specific to what you're going to do. There's also a study that I linked to that shows that even if you can follow 30 seconds of static stretching, so a good long hold with a single 3-second max isometric contraction. So just think of straightening your leg out, squeezing your quad as hard as you can for 3 seconds, boom, washes away all the so-called damage that the static stretching could have wrought. Okay. At least that single study says so, but it was backed up quite well. So the point is that if static stretching is or must remain a part of your warm-up routine, do it. And I say this because I'm highly in favor, very strongly in favor of retaining the comfort of a familiar protocol. I recognize the psychological benefits in this, and I've linked to a study that does too. They looked at 5 seconds of static stretching versus 3 by 10 seconds of static stretching versus dynamic stretching versus no stretch warm-up. And what they found was there's no difference in flexibility, no difference in physical function, but the participants felt more likely to perform well. So it affected their psychological state because they got to do something that was familiar, something that made them think, okay, now I'm ready to get this done. This is what I've always done. This puts me in the right frame of mind. This makes me think I'm taking care of my body, prepping myself for the work ahead, avoiding injury, improving performance, all the things that may not be true, but if they believe it's true, certainly powerful. So my recommendation.
Sorry, Chad, please.
Yeah. So my recommendation, and this is based on papers, recommendations, is it whether it's foam rolling or static stretching, simply follow it with some workout specific dynamic stretching. So for cyclists, this would be leg swings or brief quad stretches or heel grabs. Don't hold them, just move through them. And you can achieve the range of motion improvements and avoid that whole stretch reflex decrease that could come with the static stretching.
So what I'm gathering so far is that there's a whole lot of like absolute theories that get put out there, like do not stretch or absolutely stretch or do one thing or the other. And what I'm gathering so far is that any sort of absolute approach like that and hard and fast rule is likely to be or should be ignored. And instead, you should look at this pragmatically, personally, find what works best for you, and utilize the range to be able to be sufficiently mobile. The one thing that we haven't covered is the original point that Nate brought up was timing when Nate was being physically stopped in the pool to continue swimming. I've heard a lot of people say that you stretch after, you do not stretch before, or if you do stretch before, you have to do a warm up and then you have to stretch. So what about timing, Chad?
Yeah, so this kind of brings us to some of the other claimed benefits of mobility training, stretch training, whatever you want to call it. And one of them is to attenuate or reduce set to set performance. Or the decline in set to set performance. And it's often referred to as interset or within workout stretching. Should I stop mid-workout? And this is especially applicable to strength training because you got time between sets, right? You're sitting and resting. Maybe you can do some stretching. Doesn't apply as well to endurance training, but I can imagine it being worth a shot. I mean, something that anyone could apply if they wanted to. One study looked at agonist antagonist rolling, and basically they're looking at the quadriceps, right? So if they were rolling the agonist, they were rolling the quads. If they were rolling the antagonist, they were rolling the hamstrings. If they were doing a combination of the two, they were spending half time on one, half time on the other. And then I think there was a control as well. And they did this during the 2 minutes of rest. And then, so the one group did actually rest for those 2 minutes, and then there were the 3 other interventions. And with strength training, yes, but again, these are leg extensions, and they were done to exhaustion. So this is strength training, but it's not closely akin to endurance training, but it's at least along those lines because they did 3 sets at 10 RM to exhaustion. So they pushed to the point of exhaustion. And what they found was that whether they stretched the agonist, the antagonist, or both, or neither, it increased their training volume. And in doing so, and this was a criticism, increase their fatigue. But if the volume goes up, you would expect the fatigue to go up. So I don't think that's a valid criticism. But in all cases, it reduced the perception of muscle soreness. And regarding muscle soreness, this is something that's perhaps centrally mediated. So put another way, it's something that's probably stimulated by central brain modulators, right? So this is like not in the muscle, this is actually in the brain. And along these lines, I came across a study where they looked at people who would hold a stretch or accumulate 240 seconds of stretching or more. So we're talking more than 4 minutes. And what was interesting about this is they saw a large increase in non-local range of motion. So they could stretch one muscle and then experience greater range of motion in other muscles across the body. And this just drives home the point that peripherally, muscle tendon stiffness is what you try to address, but globally, there might be some neurological benefit. Honestly, I'm not sure it matters. I mean, it's super cool, but so what? If it results in less post-workout discomfort, it's a win.
Right.
And then with this set to set performance rolling in between, it's not the most consistent findings. The study that I just talked about a little bit earlier was the one on the positive side of things, but against it were 4 negative ones and 1 no difference. And yes, they were all strength training routines, I'm pretty sure, or studies, but it's a bit wishy-washy. And as far as the endurance training application, I'm not sure one exists, but I don't see the harm in trying it. I mean, if you're doing, say, a 5x3 VO2 max workout with 3-minute recoveries in between, why not hop off the bike, roll your muscles for 30 seconds per agonist, antagonist, whatever, get back on the bike and see how it affects your performance. I mean, it's become pretty clear there's not a heck of a lot of harm in it. This is foam rolling. We're not talking about sitting in a 30-second static stretch the entire time. So I honestly think it's probably worth a go.
That's an interesting concept. So in terms of stretching beforehand, stretching during, or stretching after, is there a specific recommendation, Chad?
Yeah. So let me give me a minute to pull my notes here. So the next question, or I guess it says, should we stop after our warm up and stretch? And that's basically what I just described. What I did skip over is before or after training.
Mhm.
So, and this brings us to yet another short list, I promise, of some of the touted benefits of stretching. And one of them, and one that actually does hold some scientific evidence, is to reduce muscle soreness and increase or reduce pain. In support of this, a meta that looked at 14 studies where they rolled before, 7 studies where they rolled after, and they got a minor reduction in muscle pain perception when done post. So, and that's interesting across a number of studies, but the consensus across so many related studies is that there is a potential for minor reductions in pain perception. On top of that, no harmful effects in this regard. So it never increased pain perception. So again, it doesn't hurt, it may benefit. The takeaway from this and related studies was that 2 to 4 sets, 30 to 60 seconds of rolling per muscle group. And really, if you want to simplify it, it's just accumulate 120 seconds of rolling per muscle group per session. Seem to be the way to reduce pain perception. And then while we're on the topic of rolling, I don't know if this is a question that was directly asked, but I think maybe Zach asked, is the intensity of the rolling. And the consensus is that you kind of have to balance the pain rating with the roll time. So, how long it takes you to roll top muscle down to the bottom of the muscle. You're going to do it rapidly if it's very painful. You can take a little more time if it's not quite painful. So the two high pain levels are going to limit the duration of each of the directional rolls. So the recommendation is if you're going to go slow, keep it more the lower end of the spectrum. Maybe a 4 of a 10 on that Likert scale. And then with high pain, which gets the job done quicker, you push it up to the higher end. But I didn't see anything that recommended anything higher than a 7 out of a 10 or a 7 on a 1 to 10 scale. So it was never excruciating pain as much as you can stand, get it done, make it brutally painful. It was high discomfort for sure, but tolerable nonetheless. And it was noted that high pain seemed to be best reserved for post-workout when muscle performance and fascial tension is less of a concern. Because with the lower or interset, there is a possibility that you can negatively impact performance. So why take that chance? Keep the intensity a little bit lower.
There's admittedly a little bit of irony here that that you have to do something really painful in order to reduce your pain perception.
That's what my sports therapist keeps reminding me. She's telling me there will come a time where you will maybe actually fall asleep during one of these massages, and it's unimaginable. I'm scooting off the table. I don't know how many times a session. It's so painful, but it's actually changing my body. So it's
so
worthwhile.
To recap on this one, Chad, and to keep this one tight, it's beforehand. If you're going, so stretching beforehand or stretching after, it's okay either way. But stretching beforehand, you want to make sure that you are doing it harder or not too hard.
Now, stretching beforehand seems to lean toward the lower end of the pain scale.
And then stretching after is okay to go
a
deeper.
bit more abuse because you're not worried about hampering performance. Rather, you're looking for the benefits of the stretching.
Awesome.
In terms
Cool.
of pain reduction. Yeah. So,
Nate,
and then
did you, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I thought Nate was going to chime in on something. Do you have anything that you want to chime in on, Nate? It looked like you were going to share partway through.
I was just going to say that for stretching for me, when we talk about it, my Adderall has to work overtime because stretching is just not that interesting to me.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, are we ready to go on? But I think you just summarized it all. Chad, you did a great job. Just in general, in the history of Nate, when all those people said, my PE teacher said to stretch, I did not stretch. I just kind of he's like deeper. I'm like, I don't care. I can't touch my toes. But it is a huge issue for a lot of people. And I think in the chat too, people are saying they like it a lot too. They keep discussing things.
For sure.
Chad, I did not say anything bad. I feel like I've just attacked you on your hard work on this. This is totally a me thing, not a you thing.
No. I didn't take it as direct criticism.
Chad, any final notes on it that we want to cover?
Yeah, I guess we can cover the last couple.
The benchmarks
purported
question?
benefits. Well, no, a few more purported benefits of adding mobility training, and one is that it reduces muscle damage. And there was another review looked at 32 studies, and they used foam rolling again to significantly attenuate an increase in the markers of muscle damage. So basically, they reduced the markers of muscle damage, rolling immediately after the workout, as well as up to 48 hours post. So a little bit of support for getting it done after. in terms of trying to reduce the amount of muscle damage that takes place, which, again, leads to those things we pursue, a quicker return to training, which leads to greater consistency, which leads to greater gains, et cetera. And also in that Skinner review, they noted that with the foam rolling, there was an increase in the range of motion, no negative performance impacts, no gender differences, and again, no direct link to improved athletic performance. And then one little bit of support for pre-training stretching is that it does raise muscle temperature and increase blood flow. And there's no real argument across this. I did link to a study that supports it, but that's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, if you're working the muscle, well, it's going to get increased blood flow. With that blood flow, you're going to get increased temperature. Pretty straightforward. And then mid-workout, mid-ride, this isn't exactly what I was talking about with the interset. It's rather a no research necessary reply, and that if at some point you have to counter the effects of long durations in a very fixed position. And sometimes you have this luxury, sometimes you can do it. I'm thinking training rides, casual rides, that sort of thing. And sometimes you just have to tolerate it. But there are dynamic on the bike examples. I mean, you can do, even if it's just taking your leg out of the pedal and flopping it around a bit, flexing your knee and going through, there are things, sitting up tall and letting your leg dangle so you open up your hips a little bit, take some pressure off your low back. All sorts of roadside and trailside opportunities where if you have the opportunity, the option of getting off and addressing it then and there, even, geez, I dare say in like a multi-ride event where you're out there for 4, 5, 6 hours, were you to take a minute every 2 or 3 hours just to deal with some of the growing pain, would that benefit your performance in the next couple 3 hours to the tune of a minute? I have to think it would.
Yeah, it's also time for snacks. Just putting that out there.
Exactly. And just a break from it, right?
No doubt.
If your scenario accommodates it. And then finally, there's what I term the no kidding claim. If you reduce recovery time, then your return to training is improved. That's just how it works. So it's a typical result. The soreness goes down, muscle damage goes down, pain goes down. All these things facilitate a more rapid return to training. So pretty hard to argue that one.
So stretching recap. Does it make you a faster cyclist? It could, if injury is inhibiting you, or if any sort of range of motion is inhibiting you from riding well. It could also take away from training time if you spend too much time doing it. There's no point in spending too much time doing it. You can stretch before, you can stretch during, you can stretch after. Just do what feels good and don't be afraid to use a variety of different tools. Does that recap it well, Chad?
Sounds pretty good. Yes.
Awesome.
Can I just make a couple quick comments on the psychological side of things here?
Sure.
And I won't take too much time, but we talked briefly about placebo, and having stretching or foam rolling being a part of your routine and kind of putting you into a good mental state. I just want to step back for a second and mention that, putting yourself in an ideal emotional state for performance is not just about placebo. Like there is definitely a real benefit to being in a primed emotional state, whatever that happens to be for you. And it's different for different people. But having a routine, and if stretching or foam rolling is a part of that, that puts you in a confident state of mind or an engaged, excited state of mind versus, a reluctant state of mind, that's a huge, that has huge impact and implications for performing, whether it's a training ride or a race. And the other thing I want to just mention is, in terms of timing this and integrating this with training, so you're not just adding one more thing and one more thing and one more thing. This is all stuff that you can do at the same time as other things. So I really liked when I was training really consistently, having a transition period after a really hard training ride to transition from sympathetic into parasympathetic. And having a stretching routine and doing some foam rolling was actually a really nice way for me to build that in. So it's kind of like, it's just a calm, block of time that doesn't have to take a lot of time, but listening to music, just watching a funny TV show, something like that. It's just a time to kind of check out and kind of bring your body, like your autonomic nervous system, kind of down a notch and transition into that parasympathetic. So there is a psychological component to this too that could be additionally beneficial, so that you're actually kind of hitting a lot of potentially helpful things that will enhance your training that don't necessarily have just to do with stretching.
If you like this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up.
If you didn't like this video, you can give it a thumbs down, but let us know what you would have done differently in the comments below.
If you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, check out TrainerRoad.com.
do it.